We are beginning the season of Lent. Lent is the journey of 40 days minus the Sundays, because Sunday is a wholly different day than the regular days. 40 days to Easter, and as we do that, we're going to look again at the Easter story, and this is kind of like if you've ever been to the Grand Canyon or out to the Black Hills or any of those things where you stick the quarter in and then you stick your face on there and you look in them. Tanner has some funny stories of everybody at the Grand Canyon with like their masks on and like being careful outside and then like sticking their quarter in and pulling it down and shoving their face against it where everybody else shoved their face against it. And but the point is you zoom in and sometimes you look at a story and it's afresh, and what we're going to do is not so much hit on the characters that we've been like, oh, I've heard a lot of stories about. You won't hear me do a sermon on Peter during this time. You've probably heard that one multiple times. So we're going to go through the Easter story and along the way pick up some of those characters that you go, oh, I don't know that I've really thought about it from their perspective before. That's my hope anyway. And what I would encourage you to do is during this season of Lent, maybe each week, if you figure maybe every 10 days, switch to a different gospel, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, and start at the triumphal entry. So the one where it's called Palm Sunday, and just read through to the end. And if each week you kind of come through, then you kind of grasp, because we're going to fit all these stories together. But what I don't want you to do is come on Sundays just waiting to see what I have to say. I would rather you listen to the person that said it first by just simply opening your Bible and reading it, because those stories have been around for a few thousand years. And mine will disappear as soon as Zuckerberg and all the Google machines take away our Christian internet savviness. So, this morning we are going to start in the book of Matthew, chapter 26. I will tell you, it will be good for you to have it in front of you. We'll have it on the screen, but I'm going to ask you a few questions. And don't worry, I am intentionally trying to keep things... I'm laughing to myself inside and outside, because whenever I say I'm trying to keep things shorter and more condensed with like one main point rather than a bunch of different things, that's usually when we kind of go off the rails, and then it's like 15 minutes late and I have to apologize for apologizing. But you're going to want Matthew 26 in front of you, because we're going to look through the story there. And we're going to start with Simon the leper. Now, this is a story that you have heard multiple times. And for those of you that are in here for first service, nobody's touched the Bible in front of you since like 1983. So you should be good to go. That's a joke. At least since Wednesday would be the most likely possibility. So you've got plenty of days in between where it should be sanitary. I'm going to pray, and then we're going to jump in and read through a bit of the story, and then I'm going to ask you a few questions that I'll give you some time to actually think about. So, Spirit, I ask that you would come, and I pray that you would take words, very old words, a story, and give it life in our hearing, give it life in our reading, give it life within our own lives, that our hearts and minds would be attentive to your journey to the cross, your journey that in many ways is ours. So, Lord, this day I pray that you would speak. I pray that you would awaken something within each and every one of us, that we can hear more than just a story that's old that happened, but a story that's old and continues to live. So in your name, amen. So I'm going Matthew 26. I'm going to start at verse 6. And now what we have here is the scene of Jesus in Bethany. Verse 6 of Matthew 26. While Jesus was in Bethany in the home of Simon the leper, a woman came to him with an alabaster jar of very expensive perfume, which she poured on his head as he was reclining at the table. When the disciples saw this, they were indignant. Why this waste, they asked. This perfume could have been sold at a high price and the money given to the poor. Now, aware of this, Jesus said to them, "Why are you bothering this woman? She has done a beautiful thing to me. The poor you will always have with you, but you will not always have me. When she poured this perfume on my body, she did it to prepare me for burial. Truly, I tell you, wherever the gospel is preached throughout the world, what she has done will also be told in memory of her." Okay, so here is your task. You need to, either by yourself or with those that are closest to you, or however you feel comfortable, I need to know who's involved in the story. Because when we're talking about a character, then what we need to do is say, what are the other characters and how does the story unfold? So you take like 48 and a half seconds to look through the story again. I'm going to get the big whiteboard out and we're going to write them down. So go ahead, do your thing. You're allowed to talk to each other if you need to also. Characters in the story, who you got? Oh, you churchy people. Say that again? Ah, yes. Who else? Sure. The woman. I didn't give myself enough room here. Okay, I'm going to erase that and do that over. Otherwise, it's going to look funny. Bouncing around. Simon, the woman, and the disciples. I'm pretty sure I'd misspelled disciples, so I'm just going to put it like that. Okay, so tell me, what do you notice about Jesus in the story? You didn't think I was just going to let you off with writing their names on the board, did you? Reclining. There's no right or wrong answers here. I'm just trying to get you to think critically about the text. What else? Is that an A-T-E or A-T-E? Yeah, okay. After I write the E, I go, I don't think that's right. Ready. Okay, let's go to the disciples. What do you notice about them? Critical. What else? Can somebody tell me what indignant means? Has anybody in here used the word indignant in a sentence or a phrase within the last 45 days? Only Dana. What does indignant mean? Oh my goodness. A-N-T or E-N-T? A? Indignant. It doesn't matter. In my house, we call these the Grumpelstiltskins. You got the Grumpelstiltskin, you got the grumpy pants on today, you're indignant. It is a bit of critical, a bit of, I think the Greek root is like exceedingly grief-barren in an angry sort of way. Like, not like, oh, I'm weighed down, but like, oh, I don't like that. This is like you wake up in the morning, and if you're in my house, like, You don't talk to Carrie until she's like sat down and had some coffee, and I'm in from working out, and I'm like, hey, what's up? Let's get the kids going. And she's like, shh, not yet. Anything else about the disciples? Inquisitive. Yeah. Thank you, Professor Van Hollen, for giving me a wonderful word. INQU. Inquisitive. And if this was not up here, I would just write it in cursive and make it scribbly so you couldn't really tell. I'm sure that's spelled wrong. You can send me an email about it later. Let's go to the woman. What do we know about the woman? Okay, somebody said wealthy. You think she was wealthy?
Well, the perfume in the alabaster box was supposedly really expensive.
So she had something that was expensive. I guess we could go possibly. Wealthy. Here we go with that grateful word again. What else? Generous. What else? I heard something over here and I heard a loving. Humble. Okay, Simon. What do you know about Simon? Oh, I messed that spelling up. What does that mean? He has a house. What kind of house does he have? Just take a second and count up the number of people. How many of you would invite 15 plus people to your house that are not your family? I mean, some of you would, but the vast majority of us would not. Right? So this guy might have a little bit of that. What else you got? Bethany. This is kind of like living in Brandon from Jerusalem. Although, maybe Rowena. Rowena is a little better. I don't know. I think Bethany might be a little nicer than Rowena. Although I do have some friends that live in Rowena. There aren't many people there. Anything else with Simon? We have no idea. So possibly influential. Okay. You guys did good. Y'all took some time and actually, see, that wasn't that hard, was it? Let me just pause and say, you just experienced small group life. It's not that scary. It's okay to jump in. Okay, so we have Jesus, and he's got something really big kind of hanging out there, right? This is just before the season of Passover. He's at Bethany. This is one of the last meals before the craziness begins, and he's relaxing. He's eating, he's taking some time. We have the woman who, if you kind of dig in, you go and you know the backstory of just the area. We don't know who she is. Some of the other gospel stories say that this is in the house with Mary and Martha and Lazarus is what we get from John. Luke's gospel talks about, I did include those other ones because they talk about it being poured on Jesus' feet rather than on his head. So I'm just taking Matthew and Mark. These would be parallel stories. But what we know is, I would say she risked much. That she had something of great wealth. So either maybe she was wealthy. Maybe we think that if this is the house of Mary and Martha and Lazarus, then maybe Simon is their dad. Possibility. These are all speculations. None of this is actually in the Bible that you can read out and go, oh yeah, you'd have to read one and pair it with another. And he is influential. We have the disciples who have the Grumpelstiltskins, and they do exactly what good religious people do. They use the right answer to justify their poopy behavior. Well, we could have used that money for the poor. Yes, you could. That is the right answer. But in this situation, that's not the best answer. And then we have Simon, who, I'm going to jump in here we know that he has a big house. We don't know what the extent of his house was or his influence, but it seemed to be somewhat pretty big. We're going to look at a little bit of the end of the chapter of Leviticus 13. Leviticus 13 and 14 is where you find all the stuff about leprosy and skin diseases. I'm going to look at verse 45. Before that is a whole bunch of stuff on what leprosy is. So leprosy within the biblical context isn't necessarily just leprosy as we see it today. So we see, I think it's called Hansen's disease, possibly, that is a struggle between nerves and the feeling of pain and the way that your body actually reacts to it. This includes that, but also includes all sorts of things. And I'll let you read the graphic grossness. For those of you that like Dr. Pimple Popper or any of those things, you can read chapter 13 and enjoy yourself. But here's the recap of verse 45. As for the diseased person, the one that has leprosy, who has the infection, his clothes must be torn, his hair on his head must be unbound. Literally, he cannot wear a turban on his head. He must cover his mustache. Here we see wearing a veil across his face, and must call out, "Unclean, unclean," with heavy exclamation points. The whole time that he has the infection, he will be continually unclean, and he must live in isolation, and his place of residence must be outside the camp. And then when you get to chapter 14, which we're not going to jump into necessarily on the screen, but here's where it talks about the ritual that I think we've talked about in previous sermons with the bird and the hyssop and the cedar and the scarlet yarn. And you go, what in the heck does all this do? And water, and it makes like a brush sort of thing that they would fling the water on if you kind of step back a little bit. But what we know is Simon is either he's still a leper and he's not listening to the rules. So when you read through here, his name is Simon the leper. So is he still a leper? Does he still have issues? Is he living in town where he's not supposed to? Now, the stuff from Leviticus comes from when they were still wandering around out with the tabernacle and no specific homes. But the question then becomes, okay, so maybe he's formerly a leper. So maybe Jesus healed him. Maybe this is one of the lepers that Jesus healed. Maybe this is the leper that Jesus healed and he goes, hey, don't go tell anybody. And then he goes and tells everybody. But what we know is people that had leprosy lived a different life. Do you think that they were a little lonely? They experienced lonely. You know what you do? You go outside of the camp and you don't get to be around anybody. And you shave all your hair off from the top of your head to the bottom of your feet, everything. And then the priest comes out every 7 days to just see how you're doing. Lonely. Think they get a little bit anxious and fearful when that priest comes back? Is that spot looking better or is it not looking better? Am I going to be okay or am I going to have to stay out here? Now you can imagine When you get to that place where you're so completely isolated, and some of you can empathize with this, maybe some of you at home that have still been at home for a number of weeks, months, maybe a year now, where we live in this COVID crazy world where we don't go around people. We lose interaction. Then what do you crave? Interaction. So he's out, gone, can't be around people. Now maybe there was some times within this context where the lepers would gather together, but this was pretty rare. The majority is people were told to go, and you don't get to be around other people. And so what you crave is interaction. You crave people. You crave someone to touch you. You crave someone to talk to you. You enjoy the wind that blows on your face when nobody's around so that you don't have to cover yourself up and say unclean. There's a bit of anxiety, there's some fear, there's some loneliness, there's some struggle. Now let's put some of these pieces together. We have the disciples, no doubt reclining at the table with Jesus, hanging out. And this is one of those last solidifying moments, one of those teachable moments where sometimes all the right things aren't the best things, but it's also a humbling moment because they were right, and Jesus turns around and goes, "Don't think you're that right. This is pretty important too." Oh, okay. You have the woman who literally shows them exactly what last will be first looks like. They're the ones that are supposed to know. She has a gracious moment. We have Jesus facing down a very, very lonely path. There's nobody with him until the very end. And his phrase is continually, "If you say so." But what does he have? Do we hear of him taking a bunch of baths in between now and the cross? Somebody said he smells good. Yeah. Now, the perfume that she put on, they would say, is maybe a year's wages. But you know that it's going to linger. It's going to last. And I like this story because it's on his head and it goes over his body rather than just on his feet. And now you can imagine that every moment that he really wants to say, "Is this worth it?" Yes, it is. On the cross, when every breath is labored, it's for more than just me. And then you have Simon, the one that, has anybody heard a sermon on Simon the leper? I never had. But would any of this happen if he did not open his home? He knows what it's like to be alone. He knows what it's like to be humbled, and he knows what it's like to have the grace of God impact his life. And what he chose to do is say, "This is pretty important. I'll make space for you so that something can happen." Now here's our struggle is we live in a day and age where our rooms and our homes and our houses are our sacred little kingdoms. You hit the button on the garage, you go in, you hit the garage door, it comes down. You maybe go out and get the mail. You do the odd wave at your neighbor unless you're one of those weird people that actually knows your neighbor's name. But we don't really let people in unless we've done what? Super duper cleaned. Because you wouldn't want anybody to think that you weren't a clean person, even though they do the exact same thing if you were to go to their house. We don't let anybody see how we truly live. And here, Simon, the formerly unclean one, the one that longs to have interaction, the one that knows what it's like to be alone, that Jesus is about to face down, that knows what it's like to not feel touch, that knows what it's like to be humbled, to have to cry out in front of everybody, unclean. The one that knows what it's like to experience the grace of God in a powerful way says, come to my house. I would love for you to come. I would love for you to step inside my world so that you can do a work within all of these other people. Because he says, come to my house, Jesus has a moment that will help carry him through for the next week. Because he says, come to my house, the woman is now remembered for all eternity. Did you catch that part? Wherever the gospel is preached, you will hear this story. Because he says, come to my house, they suddenly realize that there are still teachable moments before the end. Now, for those of us that live in a nice, sheltered, closed-off world of nobody comes and nobody goes, if you're like Simon and God has touched you in your life, changed something within you, awakened faith in a way that is true and real and tangible, then I would challenge you to create space. I'm not telling you what that is or who you should invite, what your comfort level is, but it may need to stretch a bit. Because what we need to be able to do is create space for some holy interaction. They used to call this hospitality. They used to call this weird frozen rolls in my grandma's freezer for whoever might drive on the yard, because they'd come inside and sit down and have coffee, and 3 hours later they'd be like, well, I guess we should stay for lunch. Like real lunch, dinner lunch. But most of us live in the city world of I have mine and you have yours, and rarely do we intermingle those, except with the people that we're really close to. But for those of us religious folks, those of us that have followed Jesus for a while, I would challenge you to begin to open up your doors and create opportunity. And for those of us that Jesus is just a thing, maybe we follow the big guy or whoever it is up there or a higher power, but Jesus is just a story. We don't know much. I would challenge you to begin to open up your hearts and minds to say, where can I find interaction? Because if those of us that are faithful are saying we'd like to open our doors for interaction, and those that are longing for interaction can find it within our homes, suddenly we have a moment that I guarantee you the world is longing for.